Hello and welcome to another short drawing lesson. Um, couple of films ago I showed you how to draw this GN spider from the side, and it struck me that because it's quite a simple shape, that would be quite a good vehicle to use to explain how I draw vehicles from different angles, so not just side views but in perspective. I'm not sure if this is going to work as a draw along type video. It's more just to give you a bit of information as to the approach I use, and eventually I'm going to do a series of perspective videos which, if you follow them and practice them, will enable you to learn how to draw anything from any angle. So call this a sort of a taster of where you might end up. But do have a, if you've got some basic perspective knowledge, do have a go and try it yourself. So the thing I start with most often is the axles. So we'll put a couple of axles in. Is that firm enough? Can you see it? There we are. So you can see these are tapering off to an imaginary vanishing point far off to the left. On those axles we can then place the wheels. And I'm going to cheat slightly and use the guides just so you can see how I'm aligning them. Usually on a modern car you'd align them so that the minor axis sits perfectly on your axles. But because this is a vintage car, they tend to have a slight tilt, sort of a camber on them, to do with the steering geometry. So I'm just going to do that, otherwise it won't feel quite right. The back one is vertical, just like it would be on a modern car. We need to choose a size for these that would allow for another two wheels between the front and the back wheel, because that's in perspective. That's the proportions we determined in our side view, something like that. And we'll draw the wheels we can't see as well. We'll be able to see this one. And again, it's got a slight tilt on rather than like that. We're going to tilt it slightly, and we can see more of the side of this one than we can this one. And the top, if you drew a line between the tops, that would need to correspond to our perspective grid. That feels about right. And we'll draw this one, which we won't be able to see at the end, but is worth doing just so that we can think more in 3 dimensions. There we are. So you just have to think of them being nice and squarely placed, and with the tops and the bottoms corresponding to your perspective grid. So there's 4 wheels in 3D space, and it already feels like we can imagine that in 3D, and we can reinforce that a bit further by adding the chassis rails. The chassis on vintage cars are mostly just a pair of parallel lines. Sometimes they have a slight wiggle, but mostly a slight lift at the back or something, but mostly they're just like a ladder, especially GNs. So there's our chassis, and that again is working as our perspective grid and helping us think in 3D a bit more. On top of that, now we can place our body shape. So if we imagine the car from the top, the base of this body shape has got a point, maybe not quite as pointy as that. And then there's some slightly widening sides, and where it gets widest where the driver sits, and then tapering off to a tail again. So this is the top view plotted onto that perspective grid that we had. And now we can add some uprights. Like that. So we're just drawing a box in 3D space. And most of my perspective lesson, when I come to doing those, is going to be about drawing boxes in perspective, because although it's useful to know about vanishing points and horizons and know how to use a ruler and things to get to those vanishing points and to construct your drawing that way, most of the time they don't fit on your page when you're just out sketching. So you need to be able to just be able to think in 3D and think in perspective without all of the long rulers and other things and big pieces of paper. So I'll get back to this. The body does actually tilt. It's a bit higher at this end than it is that end, so I'm going to raise this end. So you can almost imagine it's like a block of wood that I'm adding bits to or chiseling bits away from. The front prow is overhanging slightly, so it's got a kind of a lean on it, right? Yeah, a bit more than these vertical ones. And the top edge of it is arched. It's curved. And then we can draw our top edge of the car. So we've just taken a box and then modified it slightly by raising one end, curving the top, adding a prow. And you can see there's our box sat nicely in perspective on top of our chassis. And from there we can take it a bit further, add the sides of the cockpit. And this is the slope of the seat. And we'll add the slope on the other side. See how it touches the axle line? We'll go to the axle line there, same place on the other side, even though we can't see a lot of that. And put it in just because it's helping us think in 3 dimensions, like a wireframe for a computer. And we can add the curve of the seat on. Let's just tweak that a bit. There's the curve of the seat, and then the tail, which is like a little cone on the back. But because of the tapering shape of it as it wraps around to the very point, is very foreshortened. We're really not going to see very much of that, even though it's quite long on the actual car from the side. You don't see much of it from that kind of angle. There's a seat. So that's your basic 3-dimensional block. And it's taken 5 minutes to get that far. And it's worth just doing all this stage nice and lightly, just getting this thing down as quickly as you can, but taking care of it so that you can see if you're going down the right track or not, whether you need to change the proportions majorly or start again if it's really terrible, or whether it's okay to carry on with. I think this is reasonable. I think the wheel size might need a bit of work, but I think it will serve as a good foundation. So I could spend the rest of the day tidying this up, making lovely line work, shading it, colouring it, doing every little detail. Or you could just spend another 5 minutes and just, call it a quick sketch. So I'll just do what we did with the side view, divide it up with the bonnet strap. And then we have the cutout for the engine. It's in there. So there's a piece cut out of the side. Just like when you're doing the side view and once you've got the basic outline down, your basic shape, dropping in all of these details is quite easy because you know exactly where they belong. There's a space for them now. They all, they correspond to something else that you've already drawn. There's the exhaust, sits down there. Some rivets. There's a kind of a curved section on the front of the car. The springs underneath. And maybe a number on the side or something. Steering wheel would be on there. Anyway, you get the idea. I'll leave it there for now, and hopefully you've got a good insight into the beginnings of a perspective drawing. And stay tuned for the next part. There'll be a series on perspective where I explain what perspective is and how to use it in your daily sketching. Hope that was good, and see you for the next one.